Good afternoon, guys. We'll just give it a couple of minutes. There's a few people still joining, I think. So we'll just give it 30 seconds or so and see how many we end up with. Okay, so it looks like most of the people who have registered have joined us. So good afternoon to everybody. As you can see on the slide there, my name's Dave Manning. I know a number of you already. And my colleague from our sister company, which is called Horses for Change, is Casey McDoodle, and she'll be taking quite a lot of this initial the slides from this particular webinar. So the title of the webinar, probably very in vogue right now, but well-being at work. You know, the word well-being has been front and foremost in many people's mind, especially during this horrible pandemic that we've been going through. But it's an issue anyway. It's nothing to do with the pandemic. Perhaps the pandemic has brought it into acute focus, but nevertheless, well-being at work is our topic for the hour. So let's get going. Hold on, just one slight technical problem. So I've heard people say to me over the years many times that people are one of our most important assets. And part of that sentence I completely disagree with, and it's the one of. I will argue that people are indeed our only asset. If, for example, if you take away in a manufacturing company, if you take away the stock from that company, the inventory from that company, you have nothing. But if you take away the people, what are you left with? Well, if you take away the people, you're left with some inventory. That inventory will eventually rot, degrade, go away. You're left with some equipment and buildings, which, if they're not maintained and used, will eventually rot, fall down, etc. So if you take the people out of a business, my argument would be, then you don't take away something, you take away everything. Hence the importance of, in my view, and in our view, people being the only business asset. If we think about some of the things that we make in our lives in terms of major investments, major investments for many people will include the purchase of a house, the purchase of a car, getting married. If you look at those major investments, of course, there are other things that people invest their money in, money and time in, but these are three big ones. Once again, if you do not maintain those things, if you do not look after the well-being of those things, if you don't paint the house, if you don't dig the garden, if you don't repair the roof, etc., if you don't look after it, it will eventually fall over. Same thing with the car. If you don't put oil in it, if you don't service it, if you don't put, look after the tires on it, etc., it will break down on us. Same thing with a marriage. If you don't look after it, if you don't invest in it, time and energy and focus, many of the human traits that Casey's going to talk about, if you don't invest in these things, they will all break down or fall over. And so what we're trying to say here is, people, if they are the biggest investment that we make in our businesses, they are our only asset, then we have to look after the well-being of those people. Otherwise, they will fall over, they will break down, they will be less productive, etc., etc. So people for us are a very key element of any business process. And it's for many years that we have used this diagram, which is lovingly referred to in our business as the sweet spot diagram, that says what we're looking to do to create an organization where we perform and excellence exists is to integrate our systems, our business processes, and our people. And that little spot in the middle, which I referred to there as the sweet spot, is where all three of those things are integrated together. Now, I know I've stolen that phraseology from sport. Perhaps golf might be the best analogy here. But, if you watch the golfer, when they get their swing just right, when they have their weight on the right foot, when they middle the ball, when all of those three things come together, they will get maximum power and maximum direction in the shot. And the golfer will be heard to say, wow, I hit the sweet spot that time. Now, the difference between myself and Tiger Woods is very simple. In fact, there is only one difference between me and Tiger Woods from a golf perspective, and that is that I comment when I hit the sweet spot. Tiger Woods comments when he doesn't. In other words, he lives and breathes in that integrated spot, whereas I pass through it occasionally. That is exactly where business excellence lives as well, the integration of those things. Now, if you look at systems, how much money do we nowadays spend investing in new systems, ERP systems, for example? And the answer is millions, oftentimes tens of millions. How much time and effort do we put into looking for and designing best practice processes? And again, that's not an insignificant amount of time and energy in many businesses. How about our people? How much time and energy do we put into maintaining our people? Maintaining as in making sure they're thriving, making sure they are fulfilled. And I believe that that answer is not very much. And so we often miss out the most important part of that circle. Implementing new systems is called dead easy. It usually costs you a lot of money, and it usually you have to have deep pockets, but nevertheless, it's easy. Defining new processes, that's easy too. You can go and seek out best practice and copy them. Getting our people to work to those things, to integrate with those things, to thrive in our organization is often very different. So we are pushing in this webinar to start to put effort and thinking into that people bubble. So just as a starting point here, well-being at work. Do any of these things resonate with you in your company in the past? We say that we have our people are our most important asset, and yet does a blame culture exist in your organizations? Most people will say no to that, and then when you observe, sure it does. Is there a lack of downtime? Is communication predominantly email based, even with people who sit back to back in the same room? Is there an expectation of excessive overtime? Are you expected to be the person who turns the lights off? In other words, outstays the boss? Is there a hierarchical style of management? Do we have functional KPIs that are very conflicting and creating behaviors that go in opposite direction, and therefore we will have dysfunctional silos? Is there a lack of compassion and empathy in the organization? Is there a lack of training and development opportunities? Training perhaps outside your own particular field? Just learning opportunities, in other words. Is there poor meeting etiquette? How many meetings have you had, meeting rooms have you been in where there is a list of good etiquette printed on the wall, and you observe the meeting and not one of those bullet points on that list are being observed? Is there a lack of generous listening where people simply wait when they're not talking? It's almost taking breath in order to wait till they can talk again. Does the Abilene syndrome exist? Some people may know what that is. Abilene is a town in Texas, and basically it's an illustration of how people often agree to things simply to get along. They don't actually agree with what's happening, but the boss says that's the best thing to do, so okay, we'll agree to get along, and that's what the Abilene syndrome means. And our heroes' favorites, do we reward them? Do we praise them? And people who run around like the proverbial, are they the people who are thought highly of? And do we hero worship those people? That might be by promotion, that might be by money, that might be by just, they're in favor. I don't know, it's a brain dump of a list, but all of these things will have a negative impact on the well-being of people at work. Open question, how many of these do you recognize? And it's clearly, well, not necessarily, but it's probably not all of them in your business, but are there some in the business? And if some of these things resonate with you, then that's a perfect reason why well-being at work is key. And this is therefore taking a position of encouraging leaders versus managers. And you can see this list, but leaders focus on people as compared to managers focuses on systems and structure. Leadership inspires trust. It doesn't rely on control. Leaders ask why, show me the working, rather than telling people how and when. In other words, they expect people and encourage people to be experts in their own 3 square yards. Leaders are original, they are authentic. And so you can read that list as well as I can read it as well, obviously. But it's the leadership side of this. People want, let me reverse that. People don't want a boss. People don't want to be managed. People want to be led. And that's inherent in every one of us. And hence, a lot of the leadership things that we need to be thinking about are hugely people focused. I remember the greatest leader that I ever worked with was a guy called Godfrey Thoma. He was the managing director, CEO actually, of several British American tobacco businesses I worked with. And this particular example comes from Pakistan. But what he said to me one time was that he said, Dave, I know nothing about the tobacco industry. That is not true. He did know a lot. He said, I know nothing about the tobacco industry. All I do is surround myself with great people and inspire the heck out of them. That's my job. In fact, he changed his title from CEO to CIO, and that did not stand for Chief Information Officer. It stood for Chief Inspiration Officer, and that's what he had on his door. So I think all of this is leading into how important it is to look after the maintenance of our people, and hence I'm going to hand over to Casey, who will talk about the well-being issue.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. As you said, I am Casey, and just to give you a quick intro, I work with DMI's sister company, Horses for Change, and a title, a bit of giveaway in the title, predominantly working with the horses to help people with whether it's personal development, leadership skills, team building, or just anything general well-being, really. So today, although I won't be talking a huge amount about the horse side, I'm hoping to just throw some thoughts out there at you, some questions, and also generally hopefully give you something to take away just to think about, really, from our perspective from well-being at work. So as following on from what David said, so when it comes to well-being at work, ultimately it's about asking yourself, what does well-being mean to you, and what does that look like in your workplace? You know, do you want to create an environment where people can really flourish, reach their potential, strive for being, striving for being better, doing better, being more productive, having a higher performance, being more efficient, all those really good positive words that we're constantly seeking in ourselves and in our team? Do you think that if you were to look back at the company that you're in or the position that you're leading, do you encourage that sort of environment? So promote and support a healthy workforce, both emotionally, mentally, and physically. I think well-being, as David said, although it's sort of a trending word at the moment, it's one of those words that I think sometimes people think, oh, that's all the wishy-washy stuff, and we need to have all the hardcore strategies and hard practical stuff. But ultimately, like I say, if your people aren't thriving, then how can any of that be achieved? So therefore, that's going to obviously have a knock-on effect to your business, your organization, whatever it may be. So looking after our people, both on an emotional and mental level, is just as important as it is physically. So looking at predominantly when it comes to companies, people put in these strategies and they put these things in place where they think that they have a well-being strategy in place, but these tend to be put in a sort of like along the sideline, standalone and kind of left to try and build themselves. And this ultimately is selling your staff short, because they won't thrive and be able to be fulfilled on a standalone basis. They need to be incorporated in your whole organization's company. They need to be incorporated in and embedded in the culture, the leadership, the personal development, the people development side of your company or business. They can't just be an afterthought, because then ultimately what you're doing is you're just setting yourself up and your staff not for success, for the very, very opposite. So do you know what makes your employees tick? Current research done, I think it was last year by CIPD, showed that ultimately one of the main things that led to people having stress at work was a heavy workload. It was 60% said that heavy workload was one of the main causes of them being absent, and 41% said it was due to management style. So if you're in a like David said before, managerial role or leadership role, what is your management style? Have you looked at what ultimately are your positive traits as from a leading point of view, and how can you instill that in others, or how can you support others better around you? Are there things that perhaps you could change in your style that could ultimately benefit your team and therefore motivate them more, inspire them more, have better trust, have better respect, all those core values that you seek in a leader? Are you ultimately instilling that in both yourself and the people around you? So who ultimately is going to be the main people to really drive the well-being at work strategy? If you have one in place, who's going to drive that forward? Well, ultimately your senior managers are in a great position. They're in a unique position to really help drive it forward, and then therefore trickle it down to your line managers, to all the other people underneath you, around you, to the side of you and above you. And it has to be, I think like David touched on, it has to be authentic. And, it has to come across genuine and true, because otherwise they're going to see right through it. Your employees will see right through it, and therefore you will lose that respect, you will lose that trust, and it will be wasted time. And again, it will be set to the side as a standalone strategy that ultimately isn't going to be fulfilled. So really understanding why and how you're doing it, and do your senior managers understand why it's so important for the well-being to be a priority within your organizational structure, and the how. So how are you going to implement all these things? Within that strategy, what does it consist of, and how are you going to either communicate that to your staff, or how are you going to show it to them ultimately? So again, like I say, trickle all this information, communication, all the way down to your line managers and further on down. So why? Some people may say, well, we'll just crack on and all be fine. Don't take work home, don't bring home life to work. Well, that's easier said than done, isn't it? And some of the benefits when it comes to individual versus the organization, well, of course, we're going to have an improved focus at work. How many times do you get out of bed and really think, yeah, I can't wait for today. I'm going to go for it today. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to strive for and take whatever comes to me and just go for it? Or do you just sort of think, oh, do you know what, I really can't be bothered today? And the focus isn't there, the engagement isn't there. If you were to look at, if you're in a position where you can look at your team or even your colleagues, how many of them would you say are solely focused and really engaged and inspired every single day that they go to work? And if they're not, then what can you do about it? Or how can you help? Or how can you support them? Because by doing all these things, you're going to, like I said, improve that focus at work. You're going to reduce stress. So that's 60% of people, whether the stress is related to heavy workload, management style, or various other things that can lead to stress. Well, how can that be minimized? Are people getting job satisfaction? Or are they ultimately not? And therefore, how can you increase it? Do they have a positive outlook, or is it constantly negative? That blame culture and everything that David was talking about. Oh, well, same thing happens every time. Constantly look at where things can be changed into a positive outlook to drive that success of both the well-being of your people and therefore the organization forward. Because well-being isn't just about physically being healthy. Yes, obviously that comes into it, but we have to generally improve the overall well-being of people. and therefore have a good knock-on effect on the relationships between colleagues as well as managers. You know, when we're nowadays so much, and I think perhaps with the this year with the pandemic, so much more is done online, and whether it's constantly through emails or Zoom, Teams, whatever it may be, now it's almost we have to work that much harder than we ever had to, I think, to have better relationships and genuine relationships, authentic relationships where we truly actually take the time out to truly listen to one another and have a genuine opinion, or whether it's constructive feedback, whatever it is, because it's so easy nowadays just to ping an email out and not think twice about what we've actually just said, or regret what we've just said because it's now written down on an email, and actually think, you know what, now I think about it, I was in a horrendous mood and I just sent it in the moment, but actually now I've cooled down a bit, I shouldn't have sent it. Well, just think about how that has an effect on the people around you, or who that email, you know, whose inbox that email went to. All these little things, although they're quite simple things and they're day-to-day things, they all have a huge effect on the well-being of our people and of one another, or just of an individual, depending on what situation you're in. And of course, by looking at the individual benefits, this is going to have a really positive knock-on effect to your business and to your organization's benefits. So you'll get that higher level of performance and increased productivity. You'll reduce absenteeism and presenteeism, if I can pronounce them right. And these are words, you know, you think, oh, what the heck does that mean if you haven't heard them before? I think this is like a modern day world thing. I'm not saying that they weren't there 40, 50, 60, how many years ago, but I think nowadays, again, because of technology and because of different ways of working now, it's different. The things that we're having to focus these days are very different to what other people in the workplace had to focus on many years ago. And it's not a case of it being any better or worse in comparing it like that. It's just, it's different. So therefore, the way we manage it and the way that we handle it and the things that we have to, initiatives that we put in place, have to therefore be different. They need to evolve with the time. They need to move on with the time that we're now in. So other benefits can be less sickness absences, attract and retain top talent. So, you know, really by keeping and appreciating and showing appreciation of the people that work for you and their talents that they do have, what can you put in place that's going to convey to those people that you really appreciate and fully take on board everything that they bring to that job role and to therefore your company? Be seen as a great place to work. You know, can you go home and look up the name of your company and say, and know that the majority of reviews online will be positive? Again, you know, that's another thing. Modern day, it's so easy to type into Google reviews of anything, whether it's a food, whether it's a company, whether it's a hotel, whatever it is. Whereas again, you couldn't do that back in the day before the internet. So straight away, that gives an impression, doesn't it, to somebody or someone who may not even have stepped foot in your workplace. So be that workplace that somebody wants to go, yeah, I want to apply for that job because they look like a great place to work. Never mind anything else, because the next generation are definitely more inclined to want to work somewhere because of how they will feel and how they'll benefit from it, rather than just the salary. It's not all about the money. And of course, your staff turnover will be reduced. So how can you create a more motivated, inspired, and high-performing workforce? Because ultimately, this leads to greater organizational success, as I've said. So a genuine well-being strategy, however that looks in your company, obviously each one would be different to a certain degree, but a genuine well-being strategy will only work if it's set from the top and trickled down. Your key managers, directors, whoever they are, have to truly and authentically live, breathe, and lead it. This is so totally key. If this doesn't happen, then why should the rest follow? Why should the rest be the ones to set the pace? Why should they be the ones to lead the way when the leaders on top aren't doing so? Set the precedent. And ultimately, starting with the simple things and then looking deeper and more broadly across your organization to see what fundamental things need to be changed to increase and improve employee well-being. So, how often do you just genuinely ask somebody, how are you doing today? And actually stop and listen and truly take on board how they're doing. That in itself to somebody could just be enough to set the tone for their day, to set the mood. How often do we think that, these subtle and simple things can have such a big significant effect? But if it's coming from the right person at the right time, then they can. And that in itself can be something very simplistic to go towards a well-being strategy. And then, like I say, diving deeper and looking at other things. Mental health is, again, is a real big thing, and it is a huge thing. It's in a huge topic in itself. So raising awareness of this and being a company that communicates that you look out for your employees' mental health as well as their physical health. What does that look like? What's the structure of that? Looking into that, and encourage your staff to be more active during the day. A lot of, depending again on what your company is and your business does, a lot of people sit at a desk for, 6 hours a day, and some people cope fine with that, others not so much. So what can you do for those people who are struggling with that sort of setup, and they can still get their work done, they can still do what they need to do and get through their list for the day, but how can you encourage them to be more active and therefore more productive? Could you offer flexible working? Could you offer something in a different situation where perhaps they do an hour in one place, then go out, do something more, get some fresh air outside, come back, crack on again? How flexible can you be within your business? And then communicate to your employees about the benefits that they have access to within that strategy. Because if it's not communicated clearly, well, then how are they ever going to know? And how are they ever going to make the most of what is being given from the company to them? And other simple things, it sounds silly, and it sounds like, gosh, how's that going to have an effect? But consider how your office design can affect well-being. Consider how the different teams and how they're placed, and does one team who actually need to communicate quite readily throughout the day with another team, are they placed at the total opposite ends of your building? Could you change things where you're helping to encourage better communication, you're helping to encourage one another being more supportive, or whatever it may be? Place more focus on promoting a healthy lifestyle, and whatever that looks like. What does healthy mean to you? What does healthy mean to your staff? And incorporate intrinsic motivation. How often do we encourage people just to generally do something because they enjoy it? Intrinsic motivation, for those of you who may not know, is basically doing something without the obvious external rewards. So we're not doing something because we've been told to do it or because we've got a deadline to do it. We're doing something because we generally enjoy it and are interested in it. How many of your staff or team members or colleagues could you go and ask and say that they're doing what they're doing because they generally enjoy it and are interested in it, and that be the only reason why they're doing it? Because within a well-being strategy, you can put situations in place where people are doing things because of those intrinsic motivators rather than anything else. So I just touched quickly on presenteeism, and again, a bit of a mouthful, but this is something that I think perhaps is more obvious perhaps now if you want to say in the modern day world, and it's basically, how often have you been physically at work but in your mind you're really not there? And there can be many reasons for this, and I think this is perhaps where your mindfulness and living in the moment and all these sorts of other tools have come about in recent years, but many a times we find ourselves just sort of going with the flow and just working from A to B, 9 to 5, get the job done, eat, sleep, repeat. And we're not really truly getting that motivation, getting that reward that I spoke about before, because we're really enjoying it. We're just doing it because it makes ends meet. And granted, sometimes there's a place where we do just need to make ends meet, but why not? If we can, as a company or as a leader, set our team, set our colleagues up to really enjoy things and to really want to be in the moment and totally soaking up everything that they're doing in that moment within their job, then why not? And if they're not, then ask ourselves why. You know, is it because physically or mentally they're not quite, they've got things going on and they need a bit extra support? Or is it merely just they're not feeling engaged or motivated? And I'm not saying, you know, you have to, as a leader, now become a counselor or a therapist or anything like that. Not at all. All you have to do is take a bit more interest in what makes your employees tick. What is it that they truly need to improve their general well-being at work? And asking them why. You know, giving that 5 minutes a day or giving that hour a week for every staff member to go and just have a moment to, you know, offload onto somebody or whoever that may be. Why not incorporate something within your well-being strategy to facilitate that? Because again, you know, how things are these days, we find ourselves, there's this generation, of course, the sandwich generation, if you want to call it, where we've got an aging population and therefore we've got an aging workforce, and that's not a negative thing, but with that comes some difficulties. There's a sandwich generation that perhaps find themselves looking after elderly relatives as well as having children. So, you know, when we're told, or the saying goes, you know, leave your stuff at the door and don't bring it to the workplace, well, perhaps that's getting harder to do. I'm not saying it was never hard not to do in the first place, or, you know, many years ago, but perhaps different scenarios that we're now faced with in our modern day way of living are having more of an impact on our working lives, and it's getting harder to leave things at home. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they should be left at home, but perhaps having something in place at work that helps to support that or work through those problems would be beneficial. Because what you're doing then is looking at your workforce and looking at your colleagues and team members as individuals, not just people that are there to do a job. They're not just their job role. They're people, they're different people, they have different needs, and they have different motivators and things that inspire them. So why not look at why, what, and how you can do something about that and implement that within your workplace to help prevent presenteeism. So, like I said before, the well-being, this is where your well-being strategy should really play a huge part in ensuring that your workforce are being supported in every way they need and possible. And going back to our senior managers and trickling it down to our line managers are in a really unique position to spot things like absenteeism, presenteeism, before it becomes a huge problem or has a huge impact on the overall working of the business, the company, or in that day-to-day, that person's role. So looking at how line managers, senior managers, are they fostering a healthy working environment? Are they confident in their own ability to know how to appropriately support and address the situation? You know, they may be in a position where they actually, you know what, I can spot it, but I haven't got a clue how I can support this person or my team better. So do they themselves need training or a better understanding of what it is that's needed in those situations? And if that's the case, well, that's where it comes in that you have things in your structure of your well-being strategy to help with that. But somebody's got to be first aware of it. And that's where it ties right back into the leadership stuff, where we talk about that trust, that respect, really knowing what makes your employees tick, and your emotional intelligence, really. So keying into people's emotions, keying into what drives them forward, and keying into where they need that extra support and where and when it's appropriate. So it goes without saying that, like I say, that well-being, health and well-being strategy at work is vitally important. It really, really is, and it needs to be high on the agenda of senior managers and general management. And I think, unfortunately, although well-being at work is a high topic at the moment, I think people still, there's an element where people still think that it can be sort of the strategy that runs parallel with the rest of the organization strategies, and it ultimately has to be truly embedded in the culture of the whole company. Everybody has to live it, breathe it, and really, really lead it. Short-term fixes will only ever sell your staff short and ultimately set you guys up for something that's not success, and therefore not organizational success. So these initiatives need to be introduced into the broader wellbeing strategy. So therefore, ultimately, something that David will possibly pick up on a bit later on, these things can be measured so that the impact on the health and the well-being of staff can therefore be monitored and measured appropriately. And I'm not saying, you know, give people consequences for not doing things. Remember that there can be positive consequences. Things don't always need to be negative. So trial and error, sometimes, you know, putting things in place and actually going, right, okay, that's really not working, or getting true feedback from your staff, from your employees to say, you know, what aspect of the wellbeing strategy has worked for them. You know, again, they're all different individuals, so everybody's going to have a different opinion. So that's what I mean by it is a huge thing in itself that should embody the whole of the organization, and truly listening and taking on people's true feedback is core to this being successful. So know what makes your workforce motivated, inspired, and engaged, and really drive it forward. So with that, I shall pass you back to David. Hopefully just gives you a little bit of an outline of some key things just to take away.
Okay, guys. Casey's mentioned embedding the well-being strategy not as an afterthought, but as an embedded part of our business management process and our strategic processes. A number of you will be familiar with the integrated business planning process or sales and operations planning. It's the artist it used to be known by. And the primary purpose of an IBP process is not as a supply chain process. It is nothing to do, well, that's not fair. It is not predominantly a supply chain process. It is the process that needs to be the primary business process by which we manage our business. Not the only, but primary. Its prime purpose in life is to execute, be the link between the strategy or strategies. Now, bear in mind, we've just spent half an hour talking about another strategy in there, the well-being strategy. IBP is there to execute those strategies, to be the link between the strategic plan and the day-to-day operations of our organization. Hence, this particular strategy needs to be embedded into that IBP process. And many of you who are familiar with IBP will be familiar with what's known as the 5-step process. You'll notice on this chart, there are more than 5 steps. It's actually 6 steps. The 5 steps used to be portfolio, demand, supply, financial, and leadership. And that was developed, including by myself, back in the 90s. I remember working one time, this particular instance was with Mars in Dubai, actually. And the lady there said to me, "You keep banging on about people, Dave. Where do people fit into this very important process?" And as a typical consultant, I needed to buy some time to that question, and my answer was everywhere. And her answer to me was, "That's not good enough. Got to do better." And so that started the thinking of, if people are truly our only, or at least one of our most important business assets, if we need to look after and maintain them, hence Casey's description of a well-being strategy, and if IBP is about executing strategy, there should be a separate step to do exactly that. Hence, we put that step in there, and it's deliberate that we didn't call it people. We called it people development. That's people development from a learning perspective, from a well-being perspective, from a health perspective. Perhaps things that we could include in that strategy are things like, just off the cuff, walking meetings. How many of us adopt the approach of not having meetings sat down on Zoom? Okay, it's more difficult now in pandemic times, but walking meetings are very effective. Not least of all because you can control the time. If it takes you 20 minutes to walk around the building, that's how long the meeting's going to be, or 40 minutes. So how many of us do that? How many of us encourage the sort of physical stuff that Casey's referred to there? And there are some simple things. So a well-being strategy would be part of an overall people development strategy. And so when I had the opportunity to develop this now 6-step process, that's why I deliberately put it in there. Casey touched on measures as well. So for all strategies, we would want to see a number of critical success factors. It is not uncommon for any particular strategy, whether it be supply strategy, demand creation strategy, new product strategy, well-being strategy, it's not unusual to find 3 to 5 CSFs, critical success factors, that are in place to make sure that strategy is on track. So what would be your 3 or 4 or 5 CSFs for the people strategy, for the well-being strategy, and how would that be supported by KPIs? If we are serious about supporting people in the way Casey has described, then we must be serious about knowing whether we're doing it or not. And we can't just say people are our most important asset. We can't just say these things. We have to, from the top, walk the talk and demonstrate that commitment through CSFs, through KPIs, etc. So a typical focus, agenda, if you like, not really agenda, but focus of the people development review would include these types of things. In other words, it's not just about hire and fire. So yes, there is a point of planning for direct labor and indirect labor, but actually it's developing the capabilities and skills and requirements of those people. Interestingly, Casey touched on the fact that young people today, which obviously includes her but not me, are more interested. They're not uninterested in salary, but they're more interested in what learning and development opportunities do I have in this organization? What's it like to work here? All of the sort of things that Casey said about understanding the reviews of companies, those are very important to people. And so what are we doing as a strategy to do something else she talked about, which is the talent attraction, retention, and development? I include that in there, and actually one of my motivations for putting this review in the process was a survey a couple of years ago now of 500 of the top CEOs of the country. Over 60% had talent, attraction, retention, and development in their top 3 answers. So it's a very important issue to very many senior people today. If it is a very important issue, let's take it very seriously. Let's have a process that implements that strategy. I always used to half joke about if you remember the old days when the senior team would go away for a strategic session, often to a country hotel. They would come up with a strategic document, which was often beautifully presented, leather-bound, PowerPoint-filled, fantastic document. What did most companies back in the day, and I still think today, by the way, but what do most companies do with that fantastic strategic document? Well, I think they put it on the shelf marked strategic document or strategic plan. How often is that strategic document a living thing that is executed on our day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and therefore influences all of the day-to-day things we do? And in my observation, people would then go back to next year's strategic planning meeting, open up the document and say, by Jove, this was good stuff, wasn't it? We should have done it. But how many companies have got a truly robust IBP process that is going to execute that wonderful document into day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month reality? And I believe that the answer to that question is not many. And if you don't have a process that's doing that execution, then you shouldn't be at all surprised when it's not executed. Hence, if indeed well-being is such an important issue today, if indeed people development is such an important issue today, hence the need, in our opinion, to have a separate review within the IBP process that actually executes that strategy. So it will include organizational development, it will include training plans on an individual needs basis. But just I deliberately separate the word training based on needs analysis. Of course, we will train you to help you do your job better. But how can we help to educate you? How can we help you to learn, just to learn, just to develop yourself? Some years ago, I worked with a company where within their, they didn't call it a well-being policy, but they did call it a people development policy. Within their policy, they would allow anybody to go on a training and education course for up to £1,000. However, the only rule of you going on that education or that course was it had to be something completely and utterly unrelated to your job. Why would that be? Well, the reason for that was they wanted to have people to get into learning again. And it was a guy who I worked with who was recounting this tale to me one time, and he said he had a secretary, and she had been a secretary in the business for something like 15 years. And she came to him one day and said, I found this course, I'm feeling stale. I've been doing this job for 15 years. I found this course on pottery. Yes, pottery. By the way, it was a pharmaceutical company. So a pottery course, it's in the evening, so it's at the local college, so I'll give up my time, but will you pay for it? And the company's answer was yes. She went on the pottery course, came back, said, I really got a lot out of that. It was great fun, learned a lot. And a few months later, she said, I found this course on project planning. I'd like to do that. Yes. And a few months later, there was a job came up in the business that was involving project management. She applied for the job and got the job. And her statement was, if I'd never taken that little tiny step of going on the pottery course, that very unthreatening little step, if I'd never taken that, I would have never taken the second one, and I would have never taken the third one. Now, I'm not suggesting that you follow that policy, but I tell you, because it doesn't half make you think, doesn't it? Investing in our people in order to help them thrive. She got a lot from the education, from the pottery course. She was buzzing after she came back from it. She's marvelous, it's fantastic, etc. How good a feeling did she have when she came to do her then job, which was secretary, her then job the following day? And I would argue it has a huge impact. So all of those types of things I would expect to see within this so-called well-being strategy or people development strategy, including the right sizing, including negotiation about money, and in the development of what we refer to as a secure-based leadership style. Casey mentioned the style of leadership. Secure base is where we expect people to be experts in their own area, in their own 3 square yards. And our job, just like Gottfried Thomas said, was to inspire that 3 square yards, but have their back. People feel better. People feel a sense of well-being if they know that their boss has their back. And that's what secure-based leadership truly means, having the back. It comes from rock climbing, where if you watch a person rock climbing, they'll typically have a partner on a rope at the bottom of the rock. The guy at the bottom will allow the climber to take their own route, make their own decisions. They'll allow them even to make mistakes. They'll even allow them to fall off the rock, but they won't allow them to hit the floor, because that's what the rope's about. And that's where the terminology came from a secure-based perspective. The other thing is, and again, Casey touched on it, about how, asking people how they are, saying well done, but heartfelt well done. It's funny, isn't it? If in business you make a mistake or you do things wrong for a number of times consecutively, eventually you'll be put on a written warning, won't you? Right, you're on a written warning now. One more time and you're out, 3 strikes and you're out type thing. How many companies adopt a process as part of their people development and well-being strategy of a written well done? And written well dones will mean an awful lot more, because, you know, I think most people do thousands of great things every day. They occasionally make mistakes. But how much does it mean? I remember working with a company one time, and this guy had got a very untidy desk, but he'd got a piece of paper on his desk which was strategically but casually positioned. And what this piece of paper was a written thank you note from the CEO for something he'd done. So I said to this guy, what's that? He said, what's what? I said, that on the desk there. He said, oh, it's nothing. It's just a note from the boss saying that I'd done a good job in something, but it's nothing. Was it nothing? Of course it was nothing. Of course it wasn't nothing, rather. It was strategically but casually positioned on his desk so that people could see it. He was as proud as punch of it. Just like I'll bet all of you have still got that little trophy that you won for the egg and spoon race at primary school on your mantelpiece. Doesn't mean anything to you, that does it? But you won't throw it away, will you? People like that thank you. They like that support, and the spontaneity of that, heartfelt, authentic, makes enormous difference to people and therefore people's well-being. So, final slide, guys. If you look at the way we treat people, so what values do we have around people? Traditionally, they were the left-hand column. Not my job, supervised, individual, training, education, not in your life. What's the first thing that goes at the end of the year? Knowledge, well, people, just you don't need to know that. Attitude to people, blooming liability. The world would be better without them, wouldn't it? Measurement, very personal reward. I don't think there are many companies still in that traditional mode. But where we want to get to is not the middle, where people are now seen as they own problems. We are facilitating and team leading. We work as teams, not individuals. Training education is still a bit of a luxury. It's the first thing that goes at the end of the year. Understanding rather than ignorant. There still seems a cost, and measurement is more team recognition, to where we want to be in support of what Casey has described, where people feel accountable and there are consequences. As she absolutely rightly pointed out, when we say consequences, it's often termed negative. No, consequences can be positive. The letter from the boss was a positive consequence. The thank you, the heartfelt thank you, was a positive consequence. Management style is all about Godfrey Thoma, coaching the best out of that 3 square yards. We want people to be working in empowered teams. Empowerment is something that is often said and very often misunderstood. Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions, and you're empowered. Heard that phrase? May have even said that phrase, have you? Well, that's not empowerment. Empowerment is don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. And by the way, here is some problem-solving training to help you. Here is some time to allow you to solve those problems in. And here is some management style again that allows you to make a mistake and not get beaten to death for doing so. As I said, how many times do we do thousands of good things every day and occasionally get something wrong? It has to be okay to make mistakes, because that means people will try. If you ask anybody if anybody has never made a bad decision or a wrong decision, there's no such thing as that. People who have never made a bad decision have never made a decision, because you don't get them all right, and it has to be okay not to get them all right. Training education is not a luxury anymore. It is an absolute necessity, and I join the two things together there: training and education, learning. Knowledge, we want experts. People are our only asset, in my view, and we want to reward the team. If we all do well, we all do well. If we, part of us does well, it's one for all and all for one, and that's the wider team, not just the team you happen to work in. So guys, that is the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. if anybody has any questions, I think our organizer Trevor will be able to pass those on to us through chat. So over to you guys in the last 5 or so minutes. Are there any questions you particularly have? We will send out the presentation and a little thank you, which is very heartfelt. And so over to you, chaps. Can't see any questions coming in, Trev. Does that mean that we have wowed everybody?
I think everyone's been totally wowed, including me.
Well, we can always have, if anybody has any afterthoughts, at least, Trevor, I think you're going to send through the presentation to everyone, aren't you, who's attended?
Yeah. And a link to the video if anybody wants to pass that on to anybody.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for your time today, guys, and for listening in.
Yeah, we appreciate it very much. So have a good rest of the day and care for each other and stay safe. Okay, thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.